All right, and today what we're going to do is probably not get right into great detail on settings this time. Traditionally, when I've done a webinar on Comply One, we've gone into absolute detail of building a form. Today, I'm probably going to do more of an overview and a few tips and tricks. Also, we're going to look at the latest thing that we've released, which is the dashboard, which you see, and the report builder. And I'll also, through the session, point out some ongoing development that's happening that will be coming out soon, and we'll get started. All right, so first thing we probably should do is a quick orientation for those that haven't used Comply One before. I'll take you through that. Obviously, we're looking at the dashboard, and we will come back to that later on. But first of all, we'll look at form profiles. The form profile register, this is where more for the person who is building forms and publishing them, this is where they are published from. So they are form profiles, a profile of the form that you want people to use, which sets all the rules, etc., of how you want that utilized or how you want that available. So what you're seeing, like in this example here, the form profiles we've got on our demo side here, these would be available to the mobile app user. We have designed it, obviously, for those that aren't using the mobile app, could complete a form on the web version. That's this link over here where you start a form. But we'll come back to this in more detail later on and put this back into place. But just for now, for those that haven't used STEM's Comply One before, this is where you would publish them to make your forms available to the end user. Completed forms, as it states itself, this is where completed forms come in from, whether the web version user or the mobile app user, they all come into here. Also, I will point out, just in case you're not aware of this, scheduled forms that haven't been completed are also listed in here. So to help you understand what I'm getting at, there is also, if you look at this filter here, by default, your completed form register will display completed and closed forms. But if you wanted to look at a collection of scheduled forms, so what I'm referring to is if we go back to form profiles, here's a scheduled form profile here. This has been assigned to someone to complete. So, and again, we'll come back to this in more detail later, but a scheduled form profile is something you're assigning to someone to complete on a periodical basis, whether it's once a month or once a week. Now, if you have multiple scheduled form profiles listed in your form profile register, rather than looking through each profile, and what I'm getting at is this. So if I click and open this, and I looked at the Forms tab, this is showing all the scheduled forms for this form profile. But what if we wanted to look at a collection of all our scheduled items yet to be completed across all of our scheduled form profiles? So rather than open each individual one, we can go to completed forms, and I'll clear this filter, and I'm now going to just select open, overdue, and I might also want to select the ones that are in progress as well. And down here, I'm just going to tick scheduled items. So this is going to now, when I click on search, only display scheduled forms that have not been completed yet. And that's how it would list them there. Obviously, in the real case for yourselves, you would see a combination of different form profiles and their scheduled forms that are not completed yet. All right. Continuing on with the basic orientation, the non-compliance register is something that we will cover also in settings, but this is the one and only condition currently that you can set within your forms to select what responses you want picked out of your forms when they're completed to come through to your non-compliance register. All right, and very handy, and we'll come back to this in more detail again as well. The calendar, this will display all of your scheduled forms that are either due, coming up, or overdue. And actions will list all of the actions that have been created from any of your completed forms. And those actions that are in here are automatically also available in STEMS 1. I'll take this opportunity now in case I don't get to cover it later on. As a quick tip, with the action register in STEMS 1, I do have a filter here where I could select just the actions that have come in from Comply 1, and I could filter down to those there. Some other features in relation to this, you could just a quick tip on this, it's quite a common support query where people are looking for actions that they know are in there, but possibly they're closed. By default, the action register does not display closed actions, so be aware of that. And you could just tick select all. I'll just click into a white space there, and that's going to display all actions, in this case in relation to Comply 1. A finer point, you'll notice there is, I'll just increase the screen size, sorry, this Comply 1 form and Comply 1 form profile. The difference there is if an action is raised in direct relation to a form, so what I mean by that is that a completed form here could have an action associated with it directly to a response, then that is this one here, Comply 1 form. So it's an action in direct relation to a response on the form. And form profile, you do have the ability with form profiles to raise actions. Sorry, I'll just click on the action tab. You can raise actions just in general relation to that form profile. So you've got that flexibility if it was something just generally you wanted to raise in relation to that subject and not specific to a form or a response in a form that's been completed. A couple of other tips while we're looking at this. The reason why I am actually spending a bit of time on this one is it's quite a common thing that comes up in support or meetings we've had with customers, and they're not aware of this feature here. And what I'm referring to is these columns here: origin ID, origin title, and origin type. Very handy if you're wanting to run a bit of a register style report on your actions and where they're coming from, because by default those are not displayed. So you just need to right click on any column header and you'll see this becomes available, and I select with columns and you'll see all of the columns that are available for the action register, and then you can decide to show or hide what columns you want in your register. Some of the benefits of that, if we looked at the Comply 1 forms, I can, for example, then decide, well, that's origin title, that's in relation to a form profile, so I'm going to group by that form profile. And it's done that for me. I could also, instead of doing that, sorry, I'll just ungroup that. I could group by the origin ID, and that will group down to the specific form it came from. So like down here, you'll see that this has come from a specific form itself. One form this has come from rather than the whole form profile. So yeah, keep that in mind. It's very handy. We do get I think a lot of questions that end up, this ends up being the solution for that. As a side point, not that we're here today for events, but probably one of the more common ones is to do with actions from events. And what that does is the origin type becomes handy for actions in relation to events, because I can see the actions and where they're coming from as in relation to the event type, and I could group by that. So keep that in mind, and that feature, that right-click feature, is available throughout STEMS and in these styles of registers. And then you've got that Save My Grid settings if you wanted to keep that design for your login. All right, I'll keep moving along now. And I will in a moment, I just heard there's a question for me to look at. I'll just make sure that I've finished on that subject and I'll have a look at that question. I'll just quickly say, and I'll come back to the question, is the same that we were just discussing with actions, essentially is the same with hazards. So any hazards that are identified out of completed forms, those hazards, once created in Comply 1, are automatically available in the STEMS 1 hazard register. So this is where you can build your own notification profiles. All right. And at the moment, these are the different options available. So compliance item due, that would be handy if you needed to build a notification for scheduled forms and when they're coming up. So for example, obviously give it a name that best suits you. As a general rule, I would leave associated types blank, and I would leave organisation structure blank as well, unless you are building it specifically for a part of your business and wanting to assign it, that someone's only wanting it for their department, for example, or their site, you might use this feature. But otherwise, if you're just wanting a collection across the whole business, I would leave that blank. Same with form profiles. Set your prior notice. So I might say I want to know about anything that's, say, a couple of days prior to the due date of a scheduled form to be completed. Select yourself or whoever else you're needing to receive that. And that's it. That will then send you notifications based on when. So even if only one's due 2 days from now, that will appear in the email. If there's 6 due in 2 days from now or less, it does collate that information into the one email for you. A couple of others, well, let's say 3 others. Compliance item overdue. Sort of like what we've just gone through there, but this is now for ones that are overdue. So scheduled forms that are overdue. Completed items. So this is letting you know about completed forms. Now this one, a couple of extra features to be aware of. You'll see down here, we can say new items, so new forms completed, or edited forms, and send immediately. Now, my view on this would be that generally, if you just need a daily report of what's being completed, you could untick send immediately and just have a summary report every day. And that will send you just one email with a list of all the forms that were completed in the last 24 hours. But that is obviously up to you. Be aware that you have got that option. You just need to untick send immediately for that summary feature. All right. And then finally, what we've got is compliance profile end due date reached. That is to set yourself a reminder for any of those scheduled form profiles. So any scheduled form profiles that, what do you call it? I'll actually open this up, visualize this for you. Down here with your schedule, obviously you've got a start date. You might set this for the next couple of years, even though it might be a monthly or weekly frequency. You've set it over a couple of year period. What it's focusing on is letting you know that this end date is reached or getting close to, so you could go in and edit and extend that end date. So that's what that notification profile is for. Now, just quickly, we do have a new notification profile coming out. It's been completed and it will be released in a matter of weeks. And that's for the non-compliance register. So we were behind schedule on that. We wanted to release that pretty much when we released the non-compliance register. But that will notify you whenever anything comes into the non-compliance register. For now, you would but until we release that new notification profile, you will have to go in there and regularly check the non-compliance register. All right, settings is where we build the forms. And then finally, we have permissions. All right, and permissions, I'm going to explain these. I'll just walk you through that. Your mobile-only users, by the way, currently you will not see them in here, but they can use the ComplyOne mobile app. No worries at all. But we are bringing those names back in. There was a reason why we took them out due to some other issues where people were changing permissions and it was causing other confusion, but we found a solution to that. It will clearly let you know who the mobile-only user is, and it'll be, for want of a better word, hard-coded, ticked for complete forms, and no other permissions can be changed on the mobile-only user. But just quickly, I'll explain. Manage completed forms and non-compliance. If you give this permission, it actually means that the user could go into the web version, if they're a STEMS user, of course, and they will see these buttons here and they will be able to create new form profiles, which means ultimately published here and available on the mobile app. So I do want to make that clear that you need to seriously consider who you're giving that permission to. Oh, sorry, I had that the wrong way around. That one there is what I was just talking about. Sorry, guys. Manage profile forms is for that button I was just explaining here. Be aware of that. This one here, manage completed forms and non-compliance, means that this user could go into completed forms and non-compliance and make changes. So they could change a completed form if it's as long as it's not closed, of course. But if it's just completed with a status of not closed, it can they can change it. They can add actions and they can add hazards. So be aware of that. View reports, straightforward. It just means the STEMS user can go in and view reports. They can run reports. They just cannot create new reports or change existing, which is that permission there. Manage notifications should be straightforward. Building notifications. Managing settings means they could build forms, and manage security is where we are now. All right, now that we've gone through that, I am going to get started on settings. Okay, so compliance record. I should say too, we more and more have acknowledged that it is quite complex in the settings side of things. While we did our best, we thought at the time with good intention to not make too many changes to the old audits and inspections in STEMS and the observation section. We realise now that some of these good intentions have made it quite complicated. We're going to be making some really good improvements in simplifying, but at the same time adding even more flexibility as well. But think of, with compliance record, as we explain up here, some examples are that it's like creating like a sub-register. So we've got things like you might have audit register, inspection register, quality, observation. I do highly recommend you're wanting to keep this as simple as possible. It's not where you put every individual form in here. Its main benefit is for filtering. So if you could imagine if we were on the completed forms and I only wanted to look at everything to do with my inspections, I could I could filter down to just that, and that will only display completed forms in relation to my inspection register. And type is a category. The best way to explain is a category of the record. So in very, very simple terms, instead where I've got an inspection register and I might have external inspections and internal inspections or audits. We give some examples again up the top there. So under my inspection register, I might have vehicle pre-starts. And you see there like site audit or project audit. Now the compliance profile designer, I'm not going to get into this today. I will just say in our next update, this will be gone. So we'll no longer need to explain it. This is part of that first simplification. There'll be known what it currently is in relation to these fields which are on the general tab. And we have now developing as we speak a way of dealing with that on the general tab itself. For each individual form profile, you'll be able to make these changes, whereas currently it is dictated from here. So I'm not going to get into this today because we are soon removing it. I will say it's going to be a lot easier, that much I will say. And if anyone does need assistance between now and when we release, by all means, let us know and support, and we'll be able to assist you with whatever it may be in this section here. The score designer, very straightforward. This is where you can build your own scoring systems, giving it a title, and then you can put in a label and you will have to put in a numeric value to that. And then as you add each one, you just click on more score and put in your next one there. Probably the best way to explain this is if we just look at one I've created already here. That's the end result of that. So whatever, within reason, it probably still is limited in what it could do, but it gives more flexibility rather than a good old 0 to 10 scoring as we used to do. This gives you some more flexibility on that. Next is the column designer. All right, now the column designer, think of it as your response, where you can build your responses that you're going to later on put into your forms, into the template section. Down here, you'll see a basic example where I've got a response for yes, no, not applicable. If I click on edit there, we get to see what I've created. And this may answer one of those questions that has come in to do with the non-compliance register. This is where I can decide what responses I want to automatically go to the non-compliance register from a completed form that has been submitted. Right, so that's where I can do that. So you'll see here I've given it a column name, yes, no, NA. That will be seen on the finished result of the form. And I can give it a description if I want to. And the end user will not see the description. The description would be for people using settings. That's who a value that is to. It's quite simple, putting in the values, and you'll notice here I can just click on that if I need to add another option for the end user to select from. And once I've finished what I've done there, and then I can just click on save. All right, so I'm going to come back to not this particular one here, but now I'll show you creating a new one. I click on add new column, give it a name, keeping in mind the end user will also see that name. And then I've got the column types that are available to me. So I've got text box, text area, checkbox. Now be aware of this. It states clearly it's a multiple selection. Reason why I'm making a point of this is quite commonly selected not realizing that the end user could select multiple responses. So for my yes, no, not applicable, I'm only wanting the user to select one of those responses. Then I should not use checkbox. I should either use drop down or radio button. Now, radio button is probably the most popular choice. My advice would be that you would use this when you've got, say, 3 to 4 responses for the end user to select from. If you start getting to like 6, 7 or more responses for the end user to choose from, drop down might be a better option. Another point I'm just going to quickly make here, which it actually, funny enough, came up in a support yesterday, and be aware of this. Text box currently will limit, and by design, that's why there is a difference. Text box and text area can make quite a difference in how you're feeling, more for the web user than the mobile only or the mobile app user, but I will point out that difference. So I'm just going to show you what we are talking about. And hopefully I've got an example here quickly. I'll probably end up not having one available here. Let's see if I can quickly find one. I may not end up being able to quickly find one. Sorry, everyone. If I can find an example later on, I'll point it out. But quite simply, the field, actually, I will be able to, I'll just have to quickly go through one here. Why I'm bringing this up is because of support that came in yesterday that raised a good valid point. I shouldn't have this set to mandatory so I don't get into this trouble. Won't be too long on this, everyone. I do want to just get to a point of showing an example of what we are talking about. It's a lot of trouble to get to illustrating this. All right, so here's an example here. So that is a text box, and it will limit if you're putting in a large quantity of text. This box does not expand or have a scroll down feature, whereas a text area does. And here's one here. So that's the basic difference between the two. And it's obviously highlights too that we have quite a limitation currently in what is available. These two options here, when it comes to the template, there are limited options, which we will be changing as well. Anyway, that's been a bit of trouble to help you understand the differences, but be aware of that. I'd say where possible, if you're expecting quite a lot of content to be entered, then select text area. All right, well, I'll keep moving along and I'll just double check I've covered everything I think of value in the column designer. But think of this as a register where you can store all of your different responses, and they can be used multiple times when building your form template. It will make sense very soon how you can utilize this when building your form. You'll also notice we've got some default ones, which is action, document, hazard, image, and score. And here's a basic description of what they are for. All right. Well, I'll keep moving along, and what we're going to do now is go to the compliance form template designer. Got some basic ones here, like we've got that vehicle pre-start form that I've got. This is the template that I've created for it. Click on edit, and you'll see that I've selected some fields, and then I've been able to to relabel them. I've said what response I want. So I want the yes, no, not applicable for later on for my questions. And I want the ability for the user to be able to select, suggest actions, attach files, also report hazards and attach photos. So I'm giving that capability there. And then finally, there's the footer. What happens next? We're going to come back to this in more detail. I'm just going to piece everything together basically for you. Once you've got your template, keeping in mind your template could be used for different forms, we finally get to the form subheading question section. And what I do is I create a new form and I would select the template that I want to use for that, my set of questions. We're going to come back to this, but just trying to help piece things together. So think of it, this is where we're setting up all our questions. This is where we're setting up our template to overlay our form on. All right, so we'll go back to the template and I can click on Add New. I would give it a title. I might put in, say, Take 5. Click on Select Headers. And these are the fields that I have available to choose from. And we are planning to add more features here, not only fields, but there is quite a limitation at the moment where if I need more than one of some of these fields, currently I cannot do that. So that is one of the projects being worked on currently as well. All right, so all I need to do is select what I'd like. So I might say, well, I need a completed by and a completed date. I want the user to select the organization structure that's relevant to the report. I might allow multiple assets because maybe during their Take 5, they might identify some assets being used in the job. I could even get them because the mobile app, by the way, will record the GPS location. Not so handy if you make that mandatory, as you saw before, for the web users, because I'd keep in mind, try and keep that optional, especially if people are completing the form on the web version, as you saw before. Now, a couple of other things I need to point out. Completed by is going to pick up, and it's really important, you always look at this column here. It is going to pick up on the user profile. So if you're using a group user, it's not going to pick up on the actual person listing it. So we might have, workshop@abc.com. So it's picking up on that user name, but it's not picking up on the individual completing the form. So again, if you've got group logins, which you can, of course, have multiple people use the same login from different devices, we then recommend considering something like this one here. Even though it says team leader, it allows for single selection of user, personnel, or associate. All right, so what I'm going to do now is click on update. And there's the fields I've selected. I can move things around in the order that I want them in, and then I could relabel. I must say again, completed by will automatically complete that on the form. All right. Whereas here I could say, if I had a group login user out there, you might put in saying, please select your name or the name of the person completing this. This is just an optional thing. It's only to do with that group thing. Otherwise, you would not need this. But keep that in mind. I can relabel any of these fields. So here I might instead put select asset if select asset applicable. just put in here that that's the GPS location. And I could say I want that to be mandatory and that one there to be mandatory and organisation structure. Oh, I should point out too, if you're ever using these asset fields, if you make that mandatory, it could catch people out, because if the asset they're dealing with is not in your STEMS asset register, which I didn't state before, those two asset selection fields do refer to the STEMS asset register. So my advice would be not to make it mandatory. Otherwise, the user won't be able to complete the form if they cannot find the asset. Now, columns. So this is in where I'm selecting the response or responses I want to use in relation to each of my questions. So I can select my yes, no, not applicable, want the ability for suggesting actions, attaching files, hazards, photos. All right, if you use the score feature, I'll just click on update and show. You then have to select from your score register. All right, again, drag and drop them into the order that you want. I should say too, another thing that's common, I haven't put it here, you might create a free text box called comments, and then you can just select that. Like this is a text area one that I've got sitting in my column register. I can make that available, and I want that so that the user can put in any comments, or in this case it's got notes, but I could actually decide, well, rather than go into columns and create a new one, I'm just going to relabel this one. All right, but I'm going to, the user must select a response, so I'm making that mandatory there. Then finally, footers. And I might use a comment field, and I'm going to put in multiple persons. So this is where they could select. It's really important, by the way, not so much the label, the default label, but take note of the type of field that's available there. And I also want signatures. All right. Again, this is another area where we're going to be making a lot more fields available soon, and being able to select multiple of where relevant. And I might decide I'm going to relabel that as summary. And here I'm going to say that select team members. And then finally signature, but I might want everyone to sign off, and I just relabel. I could give that as an instruction that team members are to sign off on this form, and I'll show you all of that shortly. And so I can click on preview, and I'm getting a web version layout, not the mobile app layout, but that's what that would look like there. And finally, I can click on save. Be aware too, another limitation currently, the joys of this new product is we spend a lot of time continuing to improve it. But in the meantime, be aware, this does not currently auto-save. You would have to be aware of making sure to save what you're doing. And we will address that down the track as well. All right, so once my form template has been created, I can then go into form subheadings and questions, click on add new. There is this feature up here, load existing form data. That gives me the ability that I could actually copy from one of my existing forms. So if you had a form that had a lot of questions that were very similar to the one you're creating and you just want to make some minor changes, I could select that, and that is basically copying a form across to the new one that I want to build. All right, now while we're looking at this, I was doing the add new, make sure you give it a title. You've got to select the record you want it associated with. You then select the template that you're wanting to use. And from here, what I start doing is I create subheadings. I give that a name. And then I can start adding questions. to my subheading. You at least need one subheading. Even if your form doesn't have a subheading, then try to think of something that's reasonably applicable. You might just literally call it questions as a subheading, and then you're putting your questions to that. And just typing in whatever it is that you're wanting to ask, or it's like a checklist, it's not necessarily a question, whatever it may be, you're putting that in there and click on update. And oh, sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry, I don't need to click on update. You can just click on there and keep adding in your questions from there. You can also change the order they're in, and you can edit or remove them at any time. All right, and then finally, well, actually we'll have a look at preview first. So you'll see now our questions overlaid in the template that we had set up. And that's what that would look like there. And then finally I can click on save. Okay, what I'm going to explain next, with form subheadings and questions, there's also another feature, which is apply your changes to associated profiles. So at the moment, until we also find an easier way, well, we do know how we're going to do it, of course, but we're working on a solution soon, once we've got on top of some other things to do with simplifying the settings, is bringing it to the user's attention when there are changes that have not been applied yet to your form profile. Now, what this does is if I make a change, for example, to the template, or I added some more questions or edited some questions, whenever you're making changes in these areas, from the score, designer, columns, template, and the questions, you will need to come in here and then click on apply your changes to associated profiles. And you select what form profiles, which is over here, that you're wanting to apply those changes to. Now, at this point, I'll explain. This is a good feature, by the way. It's not good that you have to, we don't have a thing in the system to actually bring that to your attention. But just remember that every time you make a change, you do have to come in here and apply it. The benefit is that you're in charge, you're in control of when those changes are rolled out. Also, you've got peace of mind that those changes are only applicable from this point forward. So it will not affect any historical completed forms. So for example, if you added some new questions, when you go back to old historic completed forms, those new questions will not be seen. It's only from this point forward that your changes will apply. All right. Finally, I'll just say this is another one that's disappearing. All I will say is ignore this and make sure that is enabled. We will be hiding this. We realize now that it's not something that I think any customer would want as a choice. They would all want it enabled. What I am referring to is with completed forms, it is in relation to, I'll clear this filter. It is in relation to having the ability to, on a completed form, if you made any changes, it records those changes, and it's to do with this part here, which is history. If I do have time permitting, I could show you an example of that. But basically, any changes you make, you get to keep. It automatically is storing the original copy. Any future changes are seen as different saved copies. All right. Hopefully that's made sense the way I've explained that. All right, what we're going to do is, the final thing is, once we've completed building our forms, and as in our questions, form subheadings and questions, we can then go through to form profiles, and we are able to publish that form. How that's done, we click on Add Public Form, select which register we're wanting it in. Well, this will be based on whatever the form is already assigned to in settings. You can select type. That should be, in most cases, if not all, that would be optional. Remembering that's the category. It's just another way of categorizing your forms. Select the form. Put in a title and description if you want to. That description will be seen by the end user. Now, with public forms, so what that's meaning is it's a form that could be done by anyone at any time. So they would be things like take fives, vehicle pre-starts, those sort of things that are on the fly. This organisation structure filter, if you want it available for the whole business, leave it as nothing selected. But if you wanted to apply this to just a part of your business, then you could use the organisation structure to do that. So for example, if I just selected Queensland, I've just right-clicked for that feature, then only the users that can see this part of the organisation structure will see the form. So very handy if you've got site-specific forms or department-specific forms to utilise that feature there. So once I've filled this all out, a couple of other features. One here, I could attach a file and tick that it's mandatory for the user to view, read before they start. All right, I'll just show that. Once we've done something like that, I then click on Next. This here, this asset feature is if you want to assign a specific asset or assets that you're wanting the user, for example, to do that inspection on. So keep that in mind. That's you creating the form and assigning what asset or assets you're wanting the inspection done on. If you're wanting the user to freely select which asset or assets they're doing that, completing that form on, then you do not use this feature here. You would use that field that we saw before in settings on the template, where I could select multiple assets or a single asset. Anyway, once that's done with the public form, I just click on Save and it's ready to go. So there's that vehicle pre-start. And you'll see there I can click on Start and off I go. What I do want to illustrate here, this one here, a basic example of a potential swims one. When I pointed out that where I wanted to mark the form, I wanted to select a file and make it mandatory for the user to read before they start. So there's an example. The user would have to click on that and then they're ready to start. Obviously, you'd hope they read it. They don't do what I just did, but off they go and they can then complete the form, fill it out however you've set that up. All right, while we're looking at that, this is actually a form from the vehicle pre-start. This is the single asset selection. And I've got it so that I want the user to be able to put in the odometer reading. And this, I'd say someone's fiddled with the settings because it's showing hours in brackets when it should be kilometers. Click on Continue, and then the user can start answering questions. You'll see there that's radio button selection in this case. Down here you can see where actions, files and so on are. And this is where the end user can suggest actions. I'll just quickly take you through so you can quickly see the sign-off feature. I am going to be quick through here. I'm also, because of the time factor, we'll see if there's anyone who's got any questions on anything I've covered here. But, oh, by the way, there's another feature here. These are new down the bottom here. By the way, obviously the mobile app does work offline. always has. We've had obviously some issues there, especially when it becomes an intermittent connection, but we've further addressed that issue, by the way. Anyone on the webinar today that's had those issues, we've been doing a lot of work on the form where there's intermittent connections and so forth, that it's saving the form on the device. We had avoided that before because there's certain rules even by Android and Apple, but we've found a way that we can work with those rules and avoid those issues that some may be aware of. But the added feature is also the user could just click on save, even though, by the way, a side point, I haven't clicked on save, but it has already automatically saved what I've been working on. I'll show you that as well. But just wanted to quickly show, this is where you can select for, this is that signature feature. You could even have it so that if the person's not in your database, personnel, user, or otherwise, you can free text a name in, and then they can sign off as well. Now, if I just completely get out of that, I won't even, I just wanted to quickly show, down here is where that draft is, and there it is there. There's also, just quickly, I should have done that right, and I'll send this through now. Take note of this. This feature's been available for a little while, but just in case you're not aware of it, I can email completed forms to other people. So even though that would have automatically come through to the completed forms, all right, there it is there. And anything, although I didn't select any no responses would have come here. All right. Now I am quickly running out of time. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to go through the reports as I'd promised. And I am going to have to cut short where I was going to go on that other stuff. Building reports. Be aware of this because we are noticing that reports are being probably underutilized. We've got the Excel report, which has been there for quite a long time. Giving it a name. You do have to select one of, there is a reason why we do this. We cannot have multiple forms selected because of template design issues. What I mean by that is you could not cross-pollinate different forms if they've got different templates. So you do have to select and build that report for a specific one. You could leave it blank for completed by, and then you could say last, say, 12 calendar months. And I can export that to Excel at any time, and I could save it to the report register. What these reports, these Excel register reports, you can, you'll see here, over to the right, I can export them to Excel from there. And that exports out all of the data of all those completed forms within that period of time that you've set. And so I'd strongly, just for me to save time, but I'd strongly recommend that you have a look at this and what it looks like. It is really good. You'll get all of your data out in relation to that specific form. These reports also work on the user security. So what I'm referring to, for those that do have access to user security, you'll be aware of the user data filter. Now, with the user data filter, if you've set, for example, the user for Queensland and they are set to primary, what that means is if you gave them access to the web version and to view reports, whenever they view any of their reports, the data they're seeing is governed by the user data filter. So in other words, you only have to build the report once. The main thing is make sure to leave organization structure blank. You don't need to select a specific part unless you really are wanting the report for a specific part of the business. All right, so what we're looking at now is the dashboard report builder. And this is the most recent release. And you'll see I've got all these different options of the different types of data that I can access. Non-compliance, I'm looking at completed forms, person fields. So any of your custom personnel fields that are available in forms are automatically listed here. We've got assets, hazards, and actions. I then select the date range. I'm going to leave org structure blank. You could select specific forms or leave it as all forms. And then I'm selecting whether I want it to be line, bar, or pie. All of the data feeding it comes in from down, is available below. And then finally I could tick display on dashboard, and I can export to Excel or save to the report register, or both. Obviously I could save and export to Excel. By ticking that, it will become available over here. And here you can further customize the layout, or even if you're, especially for system admin users, you can actually play around with what part of the business. It's all right for users who have their user data filter set, but for users who are across the whole business, this becomes an issue. So this is to resolve that issue where I could select a part of the business and run the dashboard to view it that way.